Hey guys, so welcome back to Screen Siren podcast. My name is Kat, and today I'm going to be going over Euphoria's season 3 and the first 3 episodes. I have been waiting patiently and also trying to really gather all the information and all of the observations that I made while watching these shows. I also went back and watched season 1 and 2 just to get a bit more background on the character analysis that we're going to be talking about. We're going to go over character analysis. We're going to go over the production as well as my own opinion about what Sam Levinson, which is the writer and director of this show, is trying to portray and or the debates that I feel like he's trying to spark online. So first thing I noticed, the pacing this season feels rushed, and honestly I'm not shocked. They only have 8 episodes to figure out how and where everyone is going to go or end up with their lives. That's a lot to cover, especially now that we're not in a controlled environment of high school. So before, all of their mistakes felt contained: school, house parties, bathrooms, bedrooms, football games, carnivals. It was messy, but it still existed inside this bubble. So the bubble's gone, and I don't think that is why the season feels so uncomfortable, because adulthood does not give you the same softness that adolescence does. A big concern everyone has been talking about is the color grading from season 1 and 2 versus what we see in the show now. We see it in the show, but we also see it in the season 1 and 2 versus the season 3 poster. It's a completely different vibe, but I do not think that that is random. I think Euphoria is trying to grow with its audience. So when Euphoria first came out, it was during COVID. The audience was around 15 to 18. The characters around 15 to 18, but now it just feels like a lot of us are 21 and 23, and so are they. So to me, Euphoria is trying to show the shift between adolescence and adulthood. And yes, it feels weird, it feels uncomfortable, but that's exactly what stepping into your 20s really feels like. It feels like the unwanted shots of reality. People are married, people are engaged, people are pregnant, people are homeless, people are in college, people dropped out of college, people are pretending, people are getting drafted, people are getting famous, people are spiraling. It's surreal. So although everyone is complaining about the color grading and the shift, I think it was necessary to capture the difference between a teen experience and an adulthood, because a lot of the mistakes they were making before were in a controlled environment. Now the mistakes have bigger consequences to their actions. So now the damage follows them, and Sam Levinson had to create a new world if he had any future of continuing the show. 4 years went by, which is a huge deal. That is a long time for a show to go without a new season. So if he was going to come back, he had to make them leave high school. He had to broaden the scope. He had to make the show grow up, even if the audience did not want it to. So we can see that in how the show is shot. In the earlier seasons, we had way more experimental videography and editing. It was called avant-garde. It was emotional. It was abstract. It was not always about telling the story in a clean way. It was about making you feel like you were inside the character's head. So for those of you guys who aren't familiar with avant-garde is in other words, experimental film. It's a type of way to shoot a film where there's a lot more visuals, there's a lot more unique cuts and shots that are being made, and experimental films typically are there to more so evoke an emotion instead of telling a narrative film through traditional cinematic shots. It was about making you feel like you were inside the character's head. That is why the glitter, the lighting, the movement, the music, the fantasy sequence, the narration of all of it worked. A lot of people do not understand what kind of show that they are watching or consuming. They talk about the colors like the colors are the only thing that changed, but it's not just the colors. It is the entire language of the show. Before, it felt first person. We were inside Rue's mind. We were inside Cassie's insecurity. We were inside Maddie's confidence. We were inside Nate's rage. Now it feels third person. We are not inside them anymore, and that is a huge difference. Rue narrates way less now. In the first 2 seasons, Rue talked about everyone because she was somehow connected to everything. Even when something was not directly about her, she still felt like the thread tying the story together. But now she is not involved in the same way, but she's somehow still narrating. And that is why people keep bringing up the theory that Rue is already dead, narrating from somewhere else, kind of like a Hannah Baker situation, if you're familiar with 13 Reasons Why. Personally, I think that would be way too predictable, unless the way she dies is more shocking than the fact that she dies. And we will get to Rue later because I do think death is all over her current character arc. But for sound, I don't want to spend forever here, but we have to talk about it because Labyrinth not being involved is extremely noticeable. The sound of Euphoria was a part of the identity of Euphoria. It was the emotional bloodstream of the show. So when people say Maddie's intro did not hit the same, I get it because Labyrinth sound makes the show feel spiritual, reckless, dreamy, and tragic at the same time. I also think the shift was intentional. They are moving away from the dreamy, pop-rooted teen chaos and into something more grounded, more cinematic, more adult. And with Hans Zimmer stepping in, of course, the sound is going to change. Now, do I think that means it is perfect? No. But I understand why they did it. So overall, I don't think that this season looks or feels different by accident. I feel and think that it is a deliberate shift from adolescence to adulthood. So from fantasy to consequence, from being inside the fantasy to watching the fantasy rot. So outside of the technical side, I really want to talk about how I actually feel about this. Some of the different debates that I've been sparking online include the OnlyFans storyline that has gone through Cassie's arc. I don't think that his depiction of it was dramatic at all, if I'm being completely honest. I found it funny. And not funny because of, like, it's not funny, but it's funny because it's so real that people are pretending it's not. What he's highlighting is what, in fact, is actually happening in real life. The normalization of OnlyFans culture, the pushing of sex sells culture, the way the internet has made sexuality not just something people engage with, but something people market, brand, and sell as an entire personality. And this is where people start acting confused. Like, people love to clutch their purses. People love to clutch their pearls when a show puts it on screen, but the same people are engaging with it. They're liking it. They're sharing it. They're following it. They're laughing at it. They're feeding into it. We have built a culture where sex sells is not just a saying anymore. It's a system that both consumers and producers are completely responsible for. The creator is making it, the audience is demanding it, and when the audience rewards it, the creator escalates. That is the psychological trap. When your body becomes a product, your confidence becomes dependent on demand. Views, likes, subscribers, messages, money, attention, validation, that is where the damage happens. If the only time you feel powerful is when you are being consumed, that is not empowerment. That's called dependence. And once you get rewarded for being sexualized, the next question becomes what gets more views, what gets more money, what gets more attention, what gets people talking. And that is how escalation happens. That is how something starts as a cute picture and becomes a complete performance. That is how something starts as an aesthetic and becomes explicit. That is how people keep pushing their own boundaries until they don't even know where the boundary even was. So, I come from a cosplay background. I have seen and worked with tons and tons of capable women who have sold themselves to this lifestyle. Specifically in cosplay, online, and conventions, you will see a lot of women dress as underage characters. And I know people love to say it's just a character, but at a certain point, it stops becoming about the characters and it starts becoming about the audience it's actually catering to. There are adults who are dressing like babies. There are adults turning innocence into kink. There are adults who lean into more childlike silhouettes. And when I saw that part of Euphoria, I immediately thought that this is exactly what he's calling out. How deranged, how far people are willing to go, how far people are willing to blur these lines just to stay relevant. And that is what is disgusting. I'm not going to soften that. It's fucking disturbing. And I mentioned this in my last video when I sat there and I talked about adults dressing like children, when I mentioned coquette styles and childlike silhouettes, and y'all were in my comments arguing me down. So clearly I have to bring more evidence to your screen because I know y'all are doom scrolling. I know you have seen the baby core and child core conversations. I know you have seen these aesthetics floating around, and instead of people calling it out, it gets rebranded. It becomes a side aesthetic, and now it's being pushed into more explicit spaces. People defend it, people normalize it, they participate in it. That is how far things have gone. At this point, it's not even a trend anymore. It's a reflection of what we are willing to accept. And that is why I disagree completely with Sophie Rain. Sophie Rain is a current OnlyFans star. She took to an interview and she said that Euphoria OnlyFans scene was over dramatized and misleading.
Pretty cool that they're bringing OnlyFans into like the entertainment space, but I think the way they're doing it is like over dramatized. I've seen her like dressed up as a dog, like being pulled around on a leash, and like I just think that's crazy. I never do that. They're definitely just, making it dramatic for entertainment, but it's not reality. Especially her dressed up as an infant. That was really disturbing to see, for me at least. That should almost be illegal. I love her character in the show. I think she plays it very well. I just think the stuff she's doing on the show is a little crazy. It's definitely dramatized for shock value. It doesn't align up with my character and my, the content that I put out. But to each their own. I just don't agree with it. We shouldn't be, portraying OnlyFans that way because a lot of young girls watch Euphoria, obviously. And I just think it's very misleading.
I understand why she would say that from her current position, but I disagree. Not because she's wrong about her own experience, but because she is speaking from one version of that world. And people keep acting like there's one clean, controlled version of this industry. There's not. There's a side that pushes boundaries. There's a side that blurs lines. There's a side that leans into shock value just to stay relevant. And just because you don't participate in a subcategory of porn does not mean it doesn't exist. That's the line. Just because you don't participate in it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And I think that pretending that it doesn't exist is how it keeps continuing to go unchecked and continuing to normalize itself. It becomes harmful when adults normalize and escalate these kinds of aesthetics because it starts to blur boundaries that should never be blurred. That is where it becomes harmful to children because adults are creating imagery that makes childlike presentations desirable in adult spaces. I don't think that this show is exaggerating at all. Chloe, who plays Faye, is a former current sex worker, brought up two digs. Now, first of all, what really bothered me was Chloe saying that she felt safer working in porn than being a waitress. And I want to be careful here because I am a waitress. I have been in the restaurant industry since I was 14 years old. So I will never sit here and pretend that the restaurant industry is some innocent, perfect workspace. It's not. Restaurants can be messy. Restaurants can be unsafe. Restaurants, unfortunately, can serve as a safe haven for felons, addicts, creeps, unstable people, and people who should not have access to young girls trying to make money. One Fair Wage says that the restaurant industry has reported some of the highest rates of sexual harassment, especially because tipped workers depend on customers for income. The organization also noted that tipped work is mostly women and harassment comes from customers, coworkers, and management. ROC's United's research has also found high levels of harassment in restaurants, with reports that women relying on tipped sub-minimum wage experience more pressure to tolerate inappropriate customer behavior. Time reported on that research, including findings that harassment was worse for women earning the federal tipped wage. So I'm not saying that waitressing is always safe. I'm not saying women are not sexualized in restaurants. They absolutely are. I have lived that. But to compare waitressing to as if they are in the same category of sexualization feels contradictory to me. Study shows that a lot of younger people are increasingly viewing OnlyFans as a normal side hustle. First of all, that's a huge cultural shift because it's not seen as extreme anymore. It's seen as accessible. And that normalization is exactly what Euphoria is calling out. And this is where I push back on the idea that willingness equals safety. Willingness does not remove risk. OnlyFans is marketed as a choice, control, independence, but the system is still driven by demand. So if you're not making money, what happens? You adjust, you push more, you escalate. That's not opinion. Even research on digital sex work shows creators have to constantly promote and increase visibility just to stay relevant. So yes, people are entering willingly, but willingness doesn't mean that the conditions stay the same. It becomes pressure to compete, to stand out, to keep attention, and what gets rewarded in that space? More exposure, more access, intensity, and that's where the line starts moving. So no, I don't think that willingness automatically makes it safer or more stable. You are still operating in a system where your value is tied to being consumed. As a waitress, yes, I could possibly get sexualized by customers. Yes, I could possibly deal with a creepy man. Yes, I may be forced to smile through comments that I never should have to hear, but my actual job is not to be sexually consumed. My job is service. My job is labor. My job is taking orders, running food, managing tables, reading people, multitasking, and dealing with chaos. And the sexual consumption is the product. That's the difference. And this is why I cannot just sit here and accept that comparison that she attempted to make. If you say waitressing is traumatizing because of being sexualized, but then choose a career where the job itself is built around being sexualized and consumed, it starts to sound contradictory to me. Or at the very least, it raises the questions of whether that choice is actually shaped by the same experiences you're trying to avoid. Because when something becomes familiar, even if it's harmful, it can start to feel normal. And that's where it can shift from just a decision into a response to what you've already been conditioned to accept. And again, I'm not saying can't have contracts. I'm not saying some people don't feel more in control in adult work. I'm not saying every restaurant is safer than every adult set, but psychologically, these are not the same kinds of labor. One job may expose you to sexual harassment much like any other job, but the other monetizes sexual access, performance, and fantasies. That is a huge distinction. The empowerment argument gets complicated because if your power depends on being consumed, is that power or is that dependence? So yeah, when you compare that to something more steady, more consistent, like hospitality or any skill-based work, it kind of shows that safety isn't really the core of this argument, because at that point, we're not just talking about the job anymore. We're talking about how your thinking has been shaped by the job. When you spent years in a system where your value is tied to attention, desirability, and demand, that starts to train how you see everything. What feels normal, what feels safe, what feels worth it. And once your perception has been built around that kind of environment, of course, your definition of safety is going to look different. You're constantly negotiating how much of yourself you're willing to give, meaning compromising your safety or personal boundaries you once had for more consumption, because that's what gets rewarded. And this isn't just an opinion. This is behavioral science. Dopamine works strongest when the reward isn't guaranteed. Random likes, money, and attention actually hook you more than something consistent. That's called addiction. That is what Euphoria is showing. It's not just saying OnlyFans is bad. It's also showing what happens when attention, money, and validation gets warped. It's showing how people start doing more and more because the internet rewards the most extreme version of themselves. And this is why Cassie is the perfect character for the storyline, because Cassie has always had a fractured relationship with being desired. She was over-sexualized at an early age. She felt wanted for her body. She wanted to be loved. She wanted to be chosen. And now instead of healing that, she is monetizing it. That is psychologically damaging. And this is not empowering just because money is attached to it. Money doesn't automatically mean that something is healthy. Money doesn't automatically make something freeing. Money does not erase the emotional cost. And this is why Cal connects into this conversation too, Nate's dad. Cal is what happens when sex and secrecy becomes the center of your life. He gave so much of himself to hidden sexual compulsions that he had nothing real left to give to the relationships that actually mattered. His marriage should have been honored. His kids should have been protected. His family should have been respected, but instead he kept feeding into this secret part of himself, and that damage did not stay with him. It shaped Nate. It poisoned the entire family. It destroyed his intimacy. And that is the part that people don't want to talk about. When sex is disconnected from responsibility, honesty, intimacy, and respect, it becomes destructive. So no, I don't think that Euphoria is being dramatic about this. I think Euphoria is showing us the emotional aftermath of a culture that keeps pretending consumption is empowerment. It's ugly. It's ugly. But ugly does not mean fake. It means you're finally seeing the dark part of this profession that people don't want to claim exists. Chloe goes on to say that it's frustrating because it makes it seem like girls with money are doing this just for fun or attention, when for a lot of people it comes from financial desperation. And I think that is a valid point. I'm not saying I agree with subjecting yourself to OnlyFans for any reason, but her perspective highlights something real. There are people who enter that space because they need money, but that's not what I'm seeing today. I'm seeing something completely different, a rise in influence decisions, especially from younger women who are not necessarily in survival situations. We are talking about people who have options, college paid for, parents keeping them on health insurance, a car provided, a support system, doors open, but they are still choosing the fastest route to money, attention, or validation instead of something sustainable. And that is the group this conversation is including and talking about. Sometimes it is about what is being marketed as the easiest and most rewarding path to success. And when that becomes normal, you start seeing people undervalue themselves even when they have doors available to them. I mean, take a look at Cassie and Maddie themselves. Cassie is living in a big Barbie dream house that her husband has provided for her. She has actual, no real true complications going on in her life for her to feel necessarily driven to do OnlyFans. She's talking about how she wants flowers, but I mean, Nate provided them anyways. I mean, she is living very comfortably. Maddie is not. But Maddie isn't Maddie isn't busting it wide open. It's not always necessary. And this is where we have to stop blindly following influencers and celebrities. They sell you an image in one phase of their life and then quietly move on from it. The promotion of a lifestyle, an aesthetic, a mindset, and then they evolve out of it after millions of people have already bought into it. We saw it with Lizzo. She promoted one message around body image and then later changed her own lifestyle. And that's her right, but it proves the point that people evolve. But the audience is still left holding on to whatever they sold. We saw it with the Kardashians, except Khloe, because I love her and she does not do any wrong in my eyes. But the Kardashian brand has pushed a certain look for years. Fillers, face, the aesthetic. And then once everyone started looking the same, they shifted. And now the audience is left trying to undo what they were told to chase. That is the cycle. They evolve, they rebrand, they move on, and you are the ones left living with the decisions. Sam Levinson is provoking us to have these types of conversations. He's putting uncomfortable realities on screen so people react, debate, and question what they're seeing. So with that in mind, we're going to get into the characters. I'm only going to speak on some of the characters. I'm not speaking on all of them. But the foreshadowing in these arcs are not subtle whatsoever. And we'll start with Rue. The foreshadowing of her finding God is about to get very real. It's all over the imagery. It's all over the tone. You have this Jesus saves showing up. You have Lexi saying, I hate Christians. I can't be friends with Christians. That's not random. That is called deliberate writing. That is the writers preparing the audience for a shift that they know most people in this current political climate are not going to accept and or be uncomfortable with. So honestly, from a storytelling perspective, it is the only thing that makes sense at this point. Because with a character like Rue, who is at the level of addiction she is at, there are only a few more believable outcomes or cinematic directions you could possibly take this. Collapse, death, or intervention. And a lot of time that intervention is framed through something bigger than that character. So purpose, structure, God, religion, faith. Something that forces this person to surrender. And I'm worried about how they're going to do this. I'm worried about how they're going to portray this, because I see a lot of people, and we see time and time again how people inaccurately represent the teachings of the Bible. And I was not particularly fond of the conversation that Rue had with her sponsor about it. It felt passive, it felt unserious. And as a Christian, I'm already cringing a little bit because I need them to either commit to it or just leave it alone. Don't use God as a plot device. Don't use faith as a cute aesthetic. If Rue is going to find God, then let that actually mean something. I was also wondering when people are going to realize how bad of a person Rue is. I love how Euphoria cast a mirror onto us because we continue to make excuses to justify Rue's actions. We do it with Rue, we do it with Cassie, we do it with Maddie, we do it with Nate, we do it with everybody, but Rue especially gets protected by the audience. An addiction explains her behavior, but that does not erase the impact that it has. Rewatching season 1 and 2, Rue does not show true sustained remorse. She feels bad when it's convenient. She cries when she gets caught. She apologizes when she has to, but the remorse lasts a second. It does not become change. And at that level of addiction that she's at, it makes sense psychologically. Addiction narrows your world. It makes everything about survival, getting the drug, getting out of consequences, getting people to believe you, getting people to stop asking questions. And when someone is that deep in any addiction, empathy can be impaired. Their thinking becomes self-serving. Their relationships become tools. And I know that sounds harsh, but Rue shows us that over and over and over again. Okay? People who are addicted to anything are typically, this is science, this is psychology, are typically self-serving people and have impaired empathy. I see it all the time. I'm thinking of 2 people in my head right now. And I know this sounds harsh, but Rue shows us that over and over and over again. She lies, she manipulates people, she uses people, she hurts people, and then we forgive her because we like her. But liking a character and understanding them are 2 very different things. And I genuinely think that she should die by the end of the season. I do. But not from drugs. I hope she gets the opportunity to die sober. And I know that sounds dark, but hear me out. If Rue dies from drugs, then the story becomes very simple. But if she gets sober, or at least has a moment of clarity, and then the audience has to mourn that person and not the addiction, you have to sit with who she was, what she did, what she could have been, what she destroyed, what she survived, and what she never got to fully become. That would be more powerful, because then her death is not just shock value, it is consequence. And I also want to shout out to a creator whose video I came across while studying and trying to review this show. She brought up Rue's race. She questioned why Rue's storyline does not really center her identity around being Black or a biracial woman. And I'm not going to lie, I never looked at it like that until she said it. But once she said it, it does make you think. I personally think that a part of that has to do with the fact that Rue is biracial. I do think that if she were fully Black, it would have been harder for the show to ignore that part of her identity. But I also don't think that the absence of that focus is automatically negative. To me, it feels like Sam Levinson's main focus was addiction and mental illnesses. And that was the majority of the theme. Mental illnesses are universal, addiction is universal, grief is universal, self-destruction is universal, and from what we know, Rue's story is inspired by his own experience, so I'm not surprised. He was originally writing in color, not necessarily writing race as the central lens. And honestly, I actually like that the show does not center Rue's story around race, not because race doesn't matter, but because if the show had wrapped her entire arc around her race, it would have become a completely different show. Rue's arc is drug addiction, self-destruction, grief, and that was present even before her dad died. Now, with Jules, I'm going to make Jules brief because Homegirl is just a mess in a nutshell. Rewatching the seasons, I see that she has just this odd fucking pattern with dating older men. Earlier, I said something important. Jules is someone who has learned what it feels like to be tolerated instead of fully accepted. And when that's your foundation, It shows up everywhere. I think her dad tried to support her, but there's a difference between trying and actually making someone feel secure in who they really are, accepting instead of addressing what is really going on in your child's life. So when you don't feel fully secure, you start looking for that confirmation in other people. Rewatching the show, Jules consistently gravitates towards older men, and she keeps putting herself in situations that realistically could get her hurt. But it's not random. She's chasing validation. She's chasing the feeling of being chosen. And that's why her storyline feels so repetitive right now. It's not growth. It's not a cycle. It's the same frustration people had with Kat, at least to me. She's deeply flawed, much like everyone else, but Jules hasn't confronted her own behavior. She hasn't taken any accountability. She's also just a bad friend in ways that people won't talk about. She disappears. She abandons people when something or more exciting shows up. She chooses a fantasy over an actual responsibility. What really stood out to me is her interaction with Nate Jacobs at Cassie and Nate's wedding. I found it odd that she could really sit there, be laughing, joking, be comfortable, be friendly after everything he did to her. And I'm sitting there like, did we forget? Did we forget he extorted her? He threatened to leak her nudes. He forced her into lying to the police so he could get out of jail or prison free card for abusing Maddie. Just because he didn't follow through on releasing her sex tape does not make him safe. So the fact that she can sit there like none of that ever happened, that tells you everything you need to know about her and her pattern. She isn't seeking love. She just seeks validation from people and situations that are dangerous. That goes back to the beginning. When you are used to being tolerated, you start accepting things that you shouldn't. She isn't seeking love. She seeks to fill a void from people and situations that are dangerous. Okay? When you are used to being tolerated, you start accepting things that you shouldn't. And honestly, this brings us right into Nate. His acting this season has been a huge debate online. And personally, I think that has more to do with the fact that maybe he is carrying some of the method acting from Priscilla. Like, that's what it seems like. But I also think that it might have a purpose because it's not just the voice, it's his entire personality. Nate does not feel like the same dominant, controlling Nate. He feels softer, almost like a pushover husband, almost like they're trying to bait us into having empathy for this awful man. He's almost like a pushover husband or like this domesticated version of himself. And when you do get a glimpse of the old Nate, the aggressive and calculated Nate, it feels awkward. It feels misplaced. Like it doesn't fit in with who he is trying to be anymore. And I think there's a possibility that they are just trying to portray a knocked and shattered male ego. Obviously, Cassie being his wife shows what happens to people who peaked in high school and then real life hits them. And on a side note, him picking Cassie over Maddie had everything to do with what he wanted validated in his male ego. Who made him feel like a real man? And I see a lot of men make this mistake. They do not want to grow with a strong woman. They do not want a woman with actual respect and boundaries for themselves. They would rather choose someone easy, someone manageable, and someone who actually makes them feel powerful without asking them to actually become better. And that is the category of mess we are seeing with Nate and Cassie. He chose the easy option, and now that easy option has become this ungrateful housewife that gives him a headache. And I find that hilarious. I find that funny because Nate and McKay actually have something in common. If you remember McKay from season 1, he never truly liked Cassie either. He was attracted to her, but he did not really like her. And I see a lot of men do this in real time. A lot of men confuse attraction with actually liking someone for who they are. They want the body, they want the image, they want to be with a girl other men desire, but they do not actually respect her. They don't actually like who she is. And Nate is doing the same thing on a bigger scale. I've also seen a lot of people say that Nate is possibly closeted like his father. And I don't get why this conversation is still happening. I personally think that is way more complicated than that. To me, what infected Nate's brain was not sexuality, it was exposure. He was a child watching his father have sex with men and with people who are not his mother, living a whole secret lifestyle. That would mess anyone up. Y'all try so hard to shove a flag up his ass while he's sitting here having nightmares about his father having sex with him. Did we forget that scene? Did we forget that scene? And a reference in the first episode about another nightmare he had within the first 20 minutes of the first episode. He got explicit exposure as a child, trauma-worthy exposure as a child. That distorts intimacy, that distorts masculinity, that distorts how you see sex, that distorts how you see power. And not for nothing, like every single straight man on this planet is infuriated by being questioned as gay. Like, first of all, we need to stop doing that. I think I honestly think it's I find it very disrespectful. I can see why it's disrespectful. It's just like if a man sat here and called me a female and a bitch, like, it's disrespectful. Most of the time when people do that to a very clearly straight male, they are just trying to diminish and demean them. And we need to stop doing that. We really do. I think it's weird, even for the people who maybe are actually closeted gays. That's a weird, odd way to press a person to just call them out and make comments. Like, it's stupid. We need to stop doing that. Like I was saying, every time Nate's masculinity is questioned, he spirals. Whether it's Maddie questioning him, whether it's the whole school making fun of him, or whether it is the rumors about him being gay, he reacts because he's insecure and he's traumatized, and his whole entire personality, his whole entire upbringing, his whole entire everything, the way that he acts and the way that his character has been driven has been shaped and molded by the fact that his father is a closeted gay man and having all of these interactions with people on the side, and not for nothing being a weirdo and recording people without their knowledge. Like, he's living with a creep. Okay, he's living with a creep slash pedophile on record, like a pedophile on record. That's who he's living with. That's his father. And he found that out at the age of like 9 or 8 or something like that. So he reacts because he's insecure and traumatized. So are we really that surprised by who he chose by the end of that last episode of season 2? I'll wait. He chose the girl who stood up for his worst nightmare, quite literally, and who made him feel like a man without actually requiring to actually become one. And that's why I'm not surprised he turned into a fraudulent businessman. He is more focused on looking stable than actually being stable. We have seen snippets that he is having money problems. We saw in the first 2 episodes, but we didn't get the full picture until the end of the 3rd episode, where he gets his ass beat, where his toe gets cut off, and the moment is not just for shock value. That is his identity collapsing. Nate has always operated under dominance, control, intimidation, and image. So to see him physically overpowered and humiliated and stripped of control is the reversal of everything he's built for himself. And during the wedding, both him and Cassie have foreshadowing that's directly referenced the earlier versions of themselves. So when Nate is screaming and losing control, it reminds me of the earlier season. I think it was season 2, where he's on the floor fighting with himself in his head while also losing it because his dad is on top of him the way that he had imagined in his nightmares and had seen on the tapes he watched as a child.
Get the fuck off me! Get your fucking hands off me, you fucking faggots! Get the fuck off!
Don't you want to keep fighting? Huh? Oh, you think you're tough now, huh? Huh? Come on, Nate.
It is also the same internal power struggle. And then here goes Cassie crying over here about her nose bleeding, sitting on the ground watching everything happen, screaming, "This is my wedding day." Like, that is the most important issue right now. And in that moment, I know that Nate regretted having Cassie as a wife, because Maddie would have either tried to fight this man or grabbed a shotgun and tried to defend him. That is exactly what Nate and every other man who fumbles the bag gets for choosing the easiest option. And now Maddie has one of the most quietly powerful arcs this season, because Maddie is not reacting the way that she used to. She's not as explosive, she's not as impulsive, she is observing. And that shift is growth. In the earlier seasons, Maddie would have gone straight into chaos, fighting, confronting, making it loud. Now she is more controlled, more aware. And honestly, I think that's a lot more dangerous. I feel like out of all of the characters that we've seen this season, Maddie has had the most significant amount of growth and character that feels natural, that feels great to watch. Starting off with Cassie. Cassie's story is not random, it's conditioning. She was one of the most relatable characters in the beginning of Euphoria. The girl who developed faster, the girl who got sexualized too early on in her life, and the girl who realized very quickly that her body was going to be the thing that people value the most about her. And when that happens that young, you don't grow normally. You get shaped. And let's be real about her experiences. She had explicit images taken of her and passed around without full consent. She had men pressuring her, pushing boundaries, and using her. Even in her relationships, like the one that she was in with McKay, there are moments that they had that were so uncomfortable to watch, moments where she is not fully present, she's not fully comfortable, but she's still going along with it anyways. And that matters, because when you've been taught your whole life that your value is in being desired, you stop recognizing when you're not being respected. And what's even deeper is how the people around her responded to her. Even Lexi, her own sister, breaks down and says, "You've been told you're beautiful your entire life." And that moment says everything. Society can't imagine what a naturally beautiful woman could be possibly struggling with. They assume that that woman who is naturally beautiful has some type of power. They assume that she's benefited from it. So instead of empathy, she gets resentment. And then we have to talk about her mother, because Cassie didn't just learn this from the outside world, she learned it at home. Her mom is aware of how men treat her. She sees it, she knows it, she's completely aware of it, and yet she continues to allow her daughter to get treated the way that she does. She doesn't protect her from it the way that any other good or great parent would. And if we're being honest, there is a lot of projection there, because Cassie reflects everything tied to her mother's own broken relationship, the women her ex-husband chose, the dynamics that collapsed her home, and instead of separating that, it gets placed onto her daughter. And we see this pattern all the time. Daughters get blamed and belittled, they get overexposed, while sons, they get excuses, they get protected, they get babied. And that brings us to Nate Jacobs and his mother, Marcia Jacobs. Nate didn't just become Nate. He grew up watching a woman who tolerated everything. He watched his mother stay in something broken. He watched his mother accept humiliation. So when she later at the wedding praises Cassie as perfect for him.
I'm Marcia, mother of the groom. As a mom of a boy, you sometimes you gotta bite your tongue. You know, when he brings home a girl that, isn't right, and that happened. But then he found Cassie, and we love her so much. And I just wanted to say thank you, everyone, for making it here to celebrate the new Mr. and Mrs. Jacobs, because we're divorced.
That's not admiration, that's projection, that's bitterness. That's someone reinforcing a dynamic she herself accepted as a perfect woman to her, is one who tolerates, one who doesn't change, one who fits into a structure no matter how damaging it is. And now when we get to Maddie, because Maddie disrupts all of that, people love to call Maddie Perez strong, but what they are really looking at is survival. Maddie is desired, but she's not protected. As an Afro-Latin woman, I'm telling you that is real. You can be wanted, you can be fetishized, you can be the girl everyone looks at, but the second you don't tolerate, you become the problem. Maddie is outspoken, she is confident, she does not fold quietly. Because of that, she is labeled as the aggressor, as too much. She's not given any grace. She's not given any lenience the way that every other character who is not a person of color would have. She's crazy, she's dramatic, she's too much, but nobody asked what got her to that point. Nate doesn't just date Maddie. I feel like he fetishizes her. And then he tried to control her. And this is something people don't want to talk about. Men like Nate don't want a woman like Maddie. They want to break women who are just like her. Because Maddie walks in confidence. She knows who she is. She doesn't need him or anyone else to define her. And for men like him, that's not something they can control. So they try and try to tear that down. They push, they manipulate, they humiliate, they escalate. He doesn't just try to hurt her physically. He tries to break her mentally. He tries to make her smaller. He tries to make her easier to control, because the goal is not just to have her, it's to reduce her. And that's why people misunderstand her reactions. They think she's being dramatic, but what they're actually watching is someone refusing to be broken. So when you put Cassie and Maddie side by side, you're not looking at opposites, you're looking at two outcomes of the same system. Cassie internalizes it. She becomes what the world wants. She performs it. She loses herself in it. Maddie resists it. She pushes back. She refuses to tolerate it, but she still gets hurt by it. And that's the part people don't want to admit. It is easier to call Cassie weak and Maddie strong than to admit that both of them are reacting to the same conditioning. I don't think that Maddie is going to have revenge, some big plot and revenge by the end of the season. I think that Cassie will be the end to her own demise. I think that Cassie will ruin her own life for herself before Maddie ever got the chance. Cassie seems more concerned about her like, it doesn't even feel like Cassie loves Nate anymore. I think it's more so just the idea and this fixation on the lifestyle she actually just wants, and not really caught up in who the person that might be. I think her obsession or her fantasy of having Nate as a partner has more to do with her jealousy that has bubbled over through her friendship and time spent with Maddie. We see a scene where she is actively looking on Maddie, or stalking Maddie's Instagram, looking at all of the places she's been and the things that she's accomplished. And it's pretty clear at that point that Cassie at this point is more driven by her jealousy and just this want to be just like Maddie. I really wanted to set the foundation to a probable episode that I will come out with once we finish up this Euphoria seasons. We have 5 episodes left now, and so I really wanted to just set a foundational level about the way that I feel and what we've seen so far before I start getting into narrative point by point by point. This was a little bit of a different type of review / analysis. Thank you guys so much for watching. My name is Kat. I will see you guys in the next episode. Make sure you guys go subscribe and comment down below any observations or any opinions that you guys want to share yourselves. I will see you guys in the next episode.